everyone, and welcome back to the 8th and final week of the Knitted Blooms Quilt Along. If you are just now tuning in, be sure to go back and watch our other videos. We have covered how to cut our fabrics, how to create our rows, how to assemble our blocks, and now it is time for quilt top assembly, so we are going to be sewing all of our blocks together. Since this week is the final week of our quilt along, we have an extra special prize for this week. I am going to be announcing the name of our next online quilting course at the end of this video, and one lucky winner is going to win a free seat in the course. So stay tuned to learn about that course and to find out how to enter to win a free seat. A couple of resources that I want to call out for this week. We have a blog post that's called 12 Tips for Long Seams. So feel free to check out that blog post before we get started. The biggest takeaway from that blog post is using pins. That's going to be super important this week. Also to use nesting seams. I'm going to show you what both of those things look like here in a few minutes. And then finally, to position your machine so that you have space to the left of your machine and also space behind your machine. Depending on how big your quilt top is, you might also want to maybe set something beside you directly to the left of you to support the weight of your quilt top as you are sewing, especially if you're making a larger bed-size quilt top. Whenever you get to that final row, you're going to have lots and lots of weight that you are bringing along with you as you're sewing, and having something like a chair right beside you to the left or an ironing board, just something that can catch and support the weight of the rest of your quilt top as you're sewing. I found that that can be super helpful. So definitely consider that throughout this week as well. So we are referring to pages 18 and 19 of the printed copy of Knitted Blooms. If you have the PDF copy of Knitted Blooms, it is page 20 and 21. So those are the two pages that we are referring to. Before we get started, if you are making the modern version of this quilt, you're going to want to determine your block placement before we start sewing our blocks together. Now, if you're making the traditional or the 4-color version of this quilt, all of your blocks look exactly identical, so you don't need to lay out your blocks necessarily. You can just keep them in a pile right beside your sewing machine. But if you're making the modern version, then this is a really good time to look at your block placement and make any swaps and fine tune where exactly your blocks are located throughout your quilt before you start sewing. So whenever I do this, I look for things like, what are the colors? I don't necessarily want two similar colors to be beside each other. Sometimes that's inevitable just depending on how many colors you are working with. Unless you are trying to do something like an ombre gradient or a color fade gradient, like if you start with all of your oranges or all of your pinks at the top and they fade down into blues, that could be really beautiful. So play around with your block layout, play around with the color placement. Also pay attention to the values of your fabrics. So if you have really dark fabrics, you might not want to position them right beside each other. You might want to spread it out so that you have light, medium, dark, all distributed evenly throughout your quilt. Also, since I am sewing with prints, I wanted to make sure that I had a mixture of scales of my print. So if I had a really large scale print, I might not necessarily want that to be right beside another large scale print. So really just making sure that all of my prints, all of my colors, and all of my values are evenly mixed up. I try not to spend more than about 5 or 10 minutes on this step. It can be really easy to overthink this process and to linger longer than what is actually needed. I speak from experience. Sometimes whenever you start rearranging things, it really becomes sort of overwhelming and confusing. And like I said, it's really easy to just overthink this step. So try not to overthink it. Really trust your intuition. It can be helpful if you have a camera to take a picture of your blocks and then look at your blocks through the screen of your phone. And then that smaller scale can really help you see what's happening. Are there any areas of sort of heaviness in the quilt? If you have lots of darker values in the top right corner, that can feel like your eye is going directly to that top right corner. So you might want to split those up, and looking at your block placement through your phone through a smaller screen can help you see that a little bit quicker. Also, if you can stand back and look from far away, sometimes if you're up too close, it's a little bit harder to see those differences, see those subtle differences between all of your fabrics. So if you can stand back, I have a design wall. It is made by Fons and Porter. I have hooks that are stuck to my wall, and then that design wall has rings that just hook right on those hooks. It is so super handy, and I will link to it if you want to check it out. You can also just hang a piece of batting on your wall. If you don't have any wall space, you are welcome to just lay your blocks on the floor. I did that for several years before I eventually got a design wall. That is totally fine. You can also use a bed top, and if you are making a really big quilt top, you might need to go outside if it's not too windy, or on the floor of a garage. You might have to get a little bit creative, but you'll just want to be able to look at all of your blocks at once. You are going to construct your quilt in rows, and then once all of your rows are created, you will sew your rows together. If you are making a larger bed size, you might decide to work in quadrants just to have smaller parts of your quilt to sew together. But since my rows include 3 blocks, I just assemble my rows one at a time. I sew my first 2 blocks together, then I add the 3rd block. For this step, it's really important to use pins to keep your pieces aligned as you are sewing. I like to place my first pin in the center point of my blocks, and then I work my way out from there. Also remember to backstitch your blocks so that you know that your seams will be secure around the perimeter of your quilt. You also want to make sure as you're sewing that your seams underneath your pieces are not getting flipped. Then once my first 2 blocks are sewn together, I will go back and add my 3rd block. Then once all of the blocks are sewn together in my row, I will take it to my ironing board and press my seams. Up until this point, I have pressed all of my seams open, but I'm going to press my seams to one side for this row assembly. So I'm going to press all of my block seams in the first row to one direction. Then for the next row, I will press those seams in the opposite direction, and this will create nesting seams, which is going to help me keep my blocks aligned when I go to sew my rows together. Then I will repeat this process for all of my rows until I have all of the rows in my quilt created. Then it's time to sew them together. So again, pins are super important for this step. Taking the time to get everything pinned before I sew is really going to make my life so much easier. So I start out by finding my nesting seams first, and I make sure that I get those seams nice and aligned. I place my pins there first, and then I add pins going out from there. And for this step, especially for the larger quilt tops, it's really important to slow down and make sure that you're really getting your pieces aligned. So I'm looking at the entire row, making sure that my edges are square once I get my pieces lined up right sides together. So really this is just me taking the time to align my nesting seams first and then adding pins from there. Then you will sew your rows together. Don't forget to backstitch these seams. Then once I have my rows sewn together, I like to press those seams open. You are welcome to press them to one side. I press them open and I use my flatter spray and my tailor's clapper. Sometimes I will do both, sometimes I will do neither, but feel free to do whatever you prefer for this step. I like them pressed open because they are nice and flat. Repeat this process until all of your rows are sewn together. Then once you have your finished quilt top, you are welcome to stay stitch around the perimeter. This is just a seam that's about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of your quilt top. That will help keep your seams from unraveling. That's definitely optional. If you backstitched everything up until this point, then they should all be secure, but sometimes I like to just be extra sure, and I will go through and stay stitch around the perimeter. If you are making the traditional version of this quilt, you will have a similar quilt top assembly, except you will have sashing and cornerstones. The pattern tells you what this will look like, but it's the same exact process, except you have a few extra pieces. Be sure you pay close attention to the seam pressing instructions so that you create nesting seams. Then you have officially finished your Knitted Blooms quilt top. I cannot wait to see how it turned out. Please share on social media, tag us, email us. We would love to see how your quilt turned out. I cannot wait to see everyone's beautiful, beautiful quilt tops. And now for the grand prize. If you take a photo of your finished quilt top, share it to social media, use the hashtags Knitted Blooms QAL, Knitted Blooms Quilt, and Lo and Behold Patterns, and then tag Lo and Behold Stitchery in the photo, then you will be automatically entered to win our grand prize. And the grand prize is a free seat in one of our 4 courses. So we have Beginner Quilting Academy, we have Triangle School, Curve College, and then our newest course, which is releasing in a couple of weeks, is called Quilt Finishing Fellowship. So this is going to cover several different ways that you can finish your quilt. So we are covering several different ways to quilt, and then also several different ways to bind. I am so excited about this next course. We are going to have lots and lots of details coming out in the next several weeks, but you are the first to know what our next course is. So remember, one lucky winner is winning a free seat in one of our 4 courses of your choice. Otherwise, that's a wrap for the Knitted Blooms Quilt Along. Thank you so much for tuning in. It has been such an honor to make this quilt alongside you. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.